The day my sister changed the locks on our childhood home, she did it at noon. Not at night, not quietly, not when I was out of town. Noon, broad daylight. I was standing in the driveway holding grocery bags when my key stopped working. I tried it once, then twice, then slower, like maybe I was the problem. The lock didn't budge. I knocked. Nothing. But I could see movement inside. The television was on. A shadow crossed the hallway. "Emily," I called. The door opened halfway, chain still latched. She stood there calm, composed. Wearing one of our mother's old cardigans, as she belonged to the house more than I ever had. "You can't just walk in anymore," she said. I thought she was joking. "What are you talking about?" She looked at the key in my hand. "You don't live here." And just like that, everything shifted. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 34 years old. And until that afternoon, I believed that loyalty was something you didn't have to question inside your own family. I was wrong. 3 years earlier, our parents died in a rainstorm on I-95. One phone call, one hospital hallway, one doctor said, "I'm sorry." That was it. No goodbye, no preparation, just silence where their voices used to be. They left behind a house in Fairfield, Connecticut, a paid-off mortgage, a carefully structured trust, investments they had built slowly over 30 years. Everything is split evenly between their two daughters. Equal beneficiaries, that's what the will said. I moved back home after the funeral. I left my apartment in Manhattan. I told my boss I'd work remotely. I handled the paperwork because Emily said she couldn't breathe without crying. She was 26. I was 31. She needed protection. I needed to be strong. At least that's how it felt. For 3 years, I paid half the taxes, half the utilities. I maintained the property. I handled the trust distributions. I met with financial advisors. I made sure nothing slipped. Emily said she appreciated me. She called me her rock. I didn't realize rocks are often used as foundations until someone decides they don't need the building anymore. 2 weeks before she changed the locks, I noticed something strange while reviewing our annual tax summaries. The trust balance was nearly empty, not reduced, drained. Transferred into a newly formed limited liability company, E. Bennett Holdings. At first, I assumed it was an internal restructuring, something our estate attorney had recommended. So I asked Emily about it that night. She didn't panic. She didn't pretend. She poured herself a glass of wine and leaned against the kitchen counter. "There was a clause," she said. "What clause?" "If one beneficiary voluntarily relinquishes interest in shared property, the other assumes full control." I stared at her. "I never relinquished anything." She gave me a look that still makes my stomach turn. "You signed the refinancing paperwork. The documents," she said, "were routine." The stack she rushed me through because the bank was closing early. I signed because she was my sister, because I trusted her. "You tricked me," I said. "No," she replied softly. "You didn't read." That was colder, because technically she was right. Within days, the house deed was transferred solely into her name. The trust dissolved under her LLC. All assets have been legally reassigned. She moved fast, like someone who had been planning for months. And now here I was, standing outside the home I grew up in, holding groceries I couldn't even bring inside. "You're selling it," I said quietly. "Yes, and I get nothing." She didn't answer. She didn't have to, the silence said everything. "You'll regret this," I told her. She smiled. "I doubt it." Then she closed the door, the lock clicked. And just like that, I was no longer a daughter of that house. I slept in my car that night, not because I was broke, but because I couldn't drive away from it. I sat there staring at the upstairs window of the bedroom we used to share during thunderstorms, trying to understand how grief had turned into a strategy. Because here's what I hadn't noticed. Emily stopped grieving a long time ago. She started calculating, and I was too busy being responsible to see it. But here's what Emily didn't know. Dad taught me about documentation, about backups, about version histories. When he created the trust, he showed me early drafts. He believed in transparency. He walked me through clauses when I was 16 because he wanted me to understand wealth, not just inherit it. And I kept copies, original copies, draft copies. Digital archives stored in a cloud account that only he and I had access to. That night, sitting in the driver's seat of my car, I opened my laptop, and I started comparing. 3 hours later, I felt something inside me go still. The clause Emily quoted, it did not exist in the original trust, not in version 1, not in version 2. Not in the notarized draft signed the month before my parents died. It appeared only in an amended filing 18 months later, filed by a different estate attorney, signed electronically. With both our names attached, but I had no memory of approving an amendment, no meeting, no explanation, no notification, which meant one of two things. Either I had missed something massive, or someone had inserted a legal change without proper authorization. And if that amendment was fraudulent, Emily hadn't just manipulated me. She had committed a crime. I leaned back in my car seat and stared at the ceiling. For the first time since the lock changed, I stopped feeling heartbroken and started feeling focused. Because Emily was planning a spring wedding, luxury venue, 200 guests, perfect family narrative, funded entirely by money she believed was legally hers, she wanted a flawless celebration. A beautiful story, and I wasn't interested in revenge, not yet. I was interested in truth, but if the truth surfaced, it wouldn't wait politely, it would arrive loudly. And if I was right, her wedding day was going to be unforgettable. I didn't go back to the house the next morning. I didn't call Emily. I didn't scream into a pillow or post something dramatic online. I booked a room at a small extended-stay hotel off Route 1, opened my laptop, and started reading. Because heartbreak fades. But paperwork doesn't lie. My name is Claire Bennett. I was raised by a father who believed in documentation more than emotion. He used to say, if it's real, it leaves a paper trail. So I followed the trail. The original trust document was dated 6 months before my parents died. It was clean, clear. Equal division of all assets between Emily Bennett and Claire Bennett. No conditions about voluntary relinquishment. No transfer trigger clauses tied to shared property. Just equal. But 18 months after their deaths, an amendment had been filed. Amendment 2. I stared at the header for a long time. Why would there be an amendment after both grantors were deceased? Trust amendments typically require the consent of the trustee and all beneficiaries, with full disclosure. I had no memory of sitting down with any attorney to revise the trust. No meeting. No explanation, no certified mail, nothing. The amendment introduced new language. If one beneficiary voluntarily relinquishes interest in jointly held inherited real property, the remaining beneficiary assumes full ownership of trust assets. Voluntarily relinquishes. The phrase that erased me, my electronic signature appeared at the bottom of the document, but something felt off, not emotionally, technically. The timestamp. It was filed on a Tuesday at 3:42 p.m. I checked my email from that date. I was in Chicago presenting a brand strategy campaign. I had time-stamped messages and conference call logs proving I was in a meeting until 5 p.m. Could I have signed digitally during a break? Possibly, but I didn't remember it. And I'm not the kind of person who forgets signing away half a family estate. I looked closer. The notary acknowledgement listed a remote notarization platform, one I had never used. The IP address logged for my electronic signature was based in Connecticut, not Chicago. My chest tightened. It wasn't just manipulation. It might be impersonation. I sat back and forced myself to breathe. Accusations require proof, so I called the estate attorney listed on the amendment. A man named Thomas Keller. He answered on the second ring. Law Office of Keller and Associates. Yes, hi, this is Claire Bennett. I'm calling regarding an amendment filed to the Bennett Family Trust 18 months ago. There was a pause. I'm sorry, I don't handle that trust. You're listed as the filing attorney. Another pause, longer. We were retained briefly for document processing, he said carefully. All beneficiary signatures were provided through our online portal. Did you meet with me? Silence. No, did you verify my identity? Our system verifies email authorization links. Which email? He read it aloud. It wasn't mine. It was an address nearly identical to mine, one letter off. Subtle, intentional, my pulse slowed. That's what anger does when it crystallizes. It stops shaking and becomes sharp. Mr. Keller, I said calmly, are you aware that filing an amendment to a trust with a forged beneficiary identity is grounds for civil and criminal liability? Another pause. I would advise you to speak with legal counsel, he said. I plan to. He ended the call. I stared at the wall for a long time after that, because this wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't sibling rivalry. It wasn't grief gone wrong. It was deliberate. Emily had created a nearly identical email account, used it to authorize a trust amendment, inserted a clause that benefited only her, and waited until I trusted her enough to sign a property document that referenced the clause number without reprinting its language. She didn't rush. She engineered it, but here's the thing about people who think they're clever. They assume no one else is patient. I hired an attorney 2 days later. Her name was Margaret Hale, mid-50s, calm. Surgical in the way she spoke. After reviewing the documents, she folded her hands and said something that changed everything. This isn't just contestable, she said. It's prosecutable. I didn't smile. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. Takes time, Margaret continued. But if we pursue a forensic audit of the electronic signatures and IP logs, we can demonstrate misrepresentation. And if we win, the trust reverts to its original structure. Assets redistributed, potential criminal exposure. Criminal, the word felt heavy. Emily wasn't just greedy, she was reckless. Margaret looked at me carefully. You need to understand something. If we file suit now, this will be public record. It will be messy. Depositions, subpoenas, court dates. I nodded. I know. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the house. About the lock clicking at noon, about the way she smiled. No, I said honestly, but I'm prepared for truth. Margaret leaned back. Then we start gathering leverage. Leverage. That word stayed with me, because Emily was planning something big. Her wedding invitations had already gone out. A luxury venue in Westport, historic ballroom, 200 guests. Our extended family, her fiancé's wealthy parents, business contacts, the image of perfection. She was building a narrative, stable, successful, poised, and lawsuits disrupt narratives. But timing controls impact. Margaret advised filing immediately. I asked for a week. Do not hesitate, to strategize, because Emily believed she had won. She believed the house sale would close next month. She believed the wedding would cement her social standing. She believed I was powerless. And sometimes, justice isn't about how hard you hit. It's about when. That night I drove past the house one more time. A for sale sign stood in the yard. The hydrangeas were blooming. I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. Emily wanted a perfect wedding, a perfect family story, a flawless public moment, and I had something that could fracture that illusion with a single sentence. Margaret called me the next morning. We received preliminary metadata from the amendment filing, and the IP address used for your signature was traced to a residential network. My stomach tightened. Whose? She paused. It's registered to the Bennett residence. I closed my eyes. It wasn't just deception, it was provable. And suddenly I understood something. I didn't need to scream, I didn't need to beg. I didn't even need to file yet, because Emily's wedding day was 6 weeks away. 200 witnesses, 1 microphone, and a truth she believed was buried. Margaret asked me one final question. Claire, when do you want to move? I looked at the calendar. And for the first time since the locks changed, I smiled. On her wedding day, the hardest part about revenge isn't the confrontation. It's the waiting. For 6 weeks, I said nothing. No lawsuit, no public accusation, no angry messages. I let Emily believe I was gone, that I had accepted defeat. My name is Claire Bennett. I've always been the steady one. The patient is one. And patience, when sharpened by betrayal, becomes something dangerous. Margaret advised me to move immediately. We have enough to file, she said. The IP logs, the false email, the unauthorized amendment, it's strong. but strong and strategic are not the same thing. If we filed before the wedding, Emily would have time to spin it. To frame me as unstable, jealous, vindictive, she had always been better at performance. I wanted timing, so instead of filing, we prepared. Margaret sent a formal records request to the remote notarization platform. Quietly, legally, we obtained server authentication logs, geolocation stamps, device fingerprints. The signature used for Claire Bennett on the amendment had been created from a MacBook registered under an Apple ID linked to Emily's name. Same serial number. Same operating system build. It wasn't just suspicious, it was definitive. When Margaret showed me the documentation, she spoke calmly. "If we present this in court, she won't survive cross-examination." I nodded. But the court wasn't the only battlefield. Emily's wedding was set for June 14th at the Fairfield Country Club. 200 guests, white roses, string quartet. A carefully curated guest list that included distant relatives who adored her and barely tolerated me. Our Aunt Diane had already posted online, "So proud of my beautiful niece. After everything this family has endured, we deserve joy." After everything this family has endured. That line stayed with me, because no one knew what I had endured. I spent those weeks rebuilding my life quietly. I signed a lease on a small apartment in Stamford. I returned to in-person work in Manhattan 3 days a week. I stopped checking the house listing online, but at night I prepared. Margaret drafted a formal complaint detailing fraudulent misrepresentation, identity falsification, and unlawful amendment of a trust instrument. It was thorough, clean, surgical. We didn't file it. We printed it, along with every piece of supporting evidence. Authentication logs, IP trace reports, email registration records showing the fake address created 2 weeks before the amendment filing. A side-by-side comparison of my real signature versus the digital replication. Emily had been careful, but not careful enough. 2 weeks before the wedding, I received an unexpected text from her. "Are you coming?" No greeting, no apology, just that. I stared at it for a long time. I typed back, "Would you like me to?" 3 dots appeared immediately. Yes. It would mean a lot. Mean a lot to who? Her fiancé, the guests, the narrative, or her? I responded, "I'll be there." I didn't tell her I already had a seat, because technically I wasn't invited. The invitation had been addressed only to Ms. Claire Bennett, sent to my old address, returned. But Aunt Diane had assumed it was a mail error and told me to just show up. Emily never corrected it, because appearances mattered, and appearances require a full cast. 3 days before the wedding, Margaret called me. "There's something else," she said. I sat up straighter. "What? The house sale closing date?" "Yes, it's scheduled for the Monday after the wedding." I understood instantly. Emily needed the sale to finalize to stabilize liquidity. The wedding deposits had already been paid, but she was likely relying on sale proceeds to replenish accounts. If the trust reverted before closing, the sale would freeze. Because I was still legally a 50% beneficiary under the original structure, Margaret didn't need to say it. The timing wasn't just symbolic, it was financial. And that's when I realized something uncomfortable. I didn't want to ruin her wedding. I wanted to restore the truth, but truth has consequences. And consequences don't wait politely until the honeymoon ends. The night before the wedding, I drove past the country club. Workers were setting up white tents. Floral arrangements are being unloaded. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and money. I sat in my car and wondered if I was doing the right thing. Emily wasn't always like this. When we were kids, she used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. She used to ask me to braid her hair before school. She used to look at me like I was safe. Somewhere between grief and greed, that girl disappeared. Or maybe I just never saw her clearly. The morning of the wedding arrived bright and humid. I wore navy, not black. I wasn't attending a funeral. I was attending a reckoning. When I entered the ballroom, conversations softened for half a second. Not dramatically, just enough. Emily saw me from across the room. Her smile flickered, then reset. She walked toward me in her white gown, radiant and composed. I'm glad you came, she said. Her voice sounded almost sincere. I wouldn't miss it, I replied. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Two sisters, same eyes, different intentions. After today, she said quietly, maybe we can start over. Start over, I almost laughed. Maybe, I said. The ceremony began 30 minutes later. Vows, applause, tears, she looked happy, genuinely, and for a brief second I questioned everything. What if exposing her destroyed more than it repaired? What if revenge felt hollow? But then I remembered the lock clicking at noon. The forged email, the stolen inheritance. The house sale is scheduled for Monday, and I remembered something else. Justice delayed too long becomes permission. When the officiant announced, "Does anyone object?" the room chuckled softly. It's tradition. Theater, no one ever means it. I didn't stand. Not yet. Because my moment wasn't about drama, it was about evidence. The reception began. Champagne poured, music started, toasts were scheduled after dinner. Emily's college friend spoke first. Then the groom's father, then Aunt Diane, and then Emily tapped her glass. I want to thank my sister Claire, she said sweetly, for teaching me strength after we lost our parents. Heads turned toward me, polite smiles, expectation. She extended her hand toward me. Claire, would you like to say something? There it was. The invitation, public, voluntary. She thought she was controlling the narrative. I stood slowly, heart steady, folder in my hand. I walked to the microphone, and for the first time in 6 weeks, I stopped waiting. When I reached the microphone, the room was warm with champagne and soft lighting. Emily stood beside her new husband, radiant in white. The string quartet had gone quiet. 200 guests watched with the polite anticipation reserved for sentimental speeches. I didn't open the folder immediately. I looked at her first. She smiled at me, the same controlled, curated smile she had perfected over the past year. My name is Claire Bennett, I began, my voice steady through the speakers. And Emily is right. We lost our parents 3 years ago. It was the worst day of our lives. The room softened. People nodded. I moved home after the accident, I continued. Not because I had to, but because family matters. At least that's what I believed. Emily's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly. I handled the estate paperwork, the taxes, the trust accounts. I trusted that we were honoring our parents' wishes together. A few guests shifted in their chairs. I opened the folder. I recently discovered that an amendment was filed to our parents' trust 18 months after their deaths. The room went still. Emily's jaw barely moved. An amendment that transferred full ownership of our inheritance to my sister under a clause that did not exist in the original trust. A whisper rippled through the tables. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse, I stated. The amendment was authorized using an email address that wasn't mine, signed electronically from an IP address registered to the Bennett residence. Silence. Not dramatic silence, heavy silence. I turned one page and held it up, not theatrically, just enough for the front tables to see the header. I verified this with the notarization platform and obtained server authentication logs. Emily finally spoke. Claire, this isn't the time. Her voice was calm, but there was a strain underneath it. You're right, I said gently. It is. I turned back to the guests. But truth doesn't always arrive at convenient times. Her husband, Daniel, looked between us, confused. Emily, he asked quietly. She didn't answer him. I didn't come here to embarrass anyone, I continued. I came because I was invited to speak about strength. I looked directly at my sister. Strength isn't rewriting legal documents after your parents die. A few gasps now. It isn't forging your sister's identity. Her face drained of color. Claire, stop, she whispered. I didn't. I retained counsel. We traced the digital signature to a device registered under Emily's name. We confirmed the amendment was filed without proper beneficiary authorization. Daniel stepped back slightly. Is that true? He asked her. She looked at him, then at me, then at the room full of people she had carefully curated. This is insane, she said finally. She's twisting everything. I didn't argue. I placed copies of the documentation on the head table in front of Daniel. Metadata doesn't twist, I said quietly. The room wasn't loud. There was no shouting. Just the sound of narratives collapsing. Our Aunt Diane stood up slowly. Emily, my sister's composure fractured. This is about money, she snapped. She's jealous. She's bitter, I shook my head. If this were about money, I would have filed in court 6 weeks ago. That landed, because I hadn't. I waited, I said softly. Because I hoped you would come to me first. Her eyes flashed. You were always Dad's favorite, she said suddenly. The room inhaled. And you think that makes fraud acceptable? I asked. She didn't answer. She looked around, searching for support, for someone to rescue her image. Daniel picked up the first page of the report. He read silently. Then he looked at her. Emily, he said carefully, did you create another email address? Her silence was answer enough. The officiant had stepped aside. The DJ stood frozen near his equipment. No one was filming anymore. They were watching. Emily's voice cracked. I deserved security, she said. You were going to leave anyway. You always leave. I felt something unexpected in that moment. Not anger, sadness. I left New York to take care of you, I said quietly. She blinked. For a second, the sister I used to know flickered through. But pride is louder than guilt. You should have read what you signed, she muttered. I nodded slowly. And you should have remembered that I keep copies. That was the end of it. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I closed the folder. I'm filing a formal complaint Monday morning, I said. The house sale scheduled for that day will likely be frozen pending investigation. Daniel looked at her again, this time differently. Not confused, distanced. You told me everything was settled, he said. It was, she replied weakly. No, I said, it was. I stepped away from the microphone. There was no applause, no dramatic exit. Just the quiet sound of 200 people recalibrating their understanding of a perfect family. As I walked toward the doors, Aunt Diane touched my arm. Claire, is this real? Yes, I said. She looked devastated. I didn't know. I know, I replied. Outside, the late afternoon sun was blinding. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. My phone buzzed in my hand. Margaret. I assume it's done, she said when I answered. Yes. Then we file. I looked back through the ballroom windows. Emily stood motionless. Her white dress no longer glowed, just fabric. And for the first time since the lock changed at noon, I didn't feel displaced. I felt restored, but justice isn't instant, it's procedural, and consequences take time. Monday morning would determine everything, and whether my sister lost more than just her wedding day. Monday morning was quiet, no string quartet, no champagne, no curated lighting. Just fluorescent office lights and legal paper. At 8:32 a.m., Margaret filed the complaint in Stamford Superior Court. Fraudulent misrepresentation, identity falsification, improper amendment of a trust instrument, petition for immediate injunction on the pending sale of the Bennett residence. At 9:14 a.m., the title company handling the house closing received notice of a legal dispute. At 9:47 a.m., the buyer's attorney froze the transaction. By 10:03 a.m., Emily knew. She called me. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, then I answered. What have you done? She demanded. Her voice sounded smaller than it had at the wedding. I restored my name, I said. You humiliated me. You humiliated yourself. Silence, then anger. You could have handled this privately. I tried, I replied calmly. You changed the locks. Another silence. Something is sobering about facts. They don't escalate, they just sit there. You're going to ruin everything, she said. I didn't create this. She hung up. By noon, Daniel's name was no longer attached to Emily's social media accounts. Their wedding photos, the ones posted in curated carousels less than 48 hours earlier, disappeared. By 2:00 p.m., I received a call from an unfamiliar number. Daniel. I read everything, he said. His voice carried exhaustion, not rage. I didn't know, he added. I believe you, I said. There was a long pause. Is it fixable? That question wasn't about the trust. It depends on whether she admits what she did, I said carefully. He exhaled. She says you forced her into it. That you pressured her about the house. I have documentation, I replied. Yes, he said quietly. I saw. He didn't ask me to drop the complaint. He didn't defend her. He thanked me for telling the truth. That's when I knew something fundamental had shifted. By Wednesday, Emily's attorney reached out. The tone was formal but cautious. They proposed mediation. They offered to revert the trust to its original structure and split the proceeds evenly. They asked that I withdraw the fraud claim in exchange for a private settlement. Margaret laid the options out plainly. If you pursue full litigation, she said, there could be criminal implications. Digital fraud involving estate instruments is serious. Serious. I sat with that word, because until now this had felt personal, sibling rivalry, betrayal, grief twisted into greed, but this wasn't emotional, it was legal. Emily had committed document fraud. And if I pushed, prosecutors could become involved. What happens if we settle? I asked. The trust reverts, the house sale proceeds are divided. She signs a formal admission of unauthorized amendment, no criminal referral. And if we do, Margaret met my eyes, it escalates. That night I didn't sleep much. I thought about thunderstorms and braided hair. I thought about the lock clicking at noon. I thought about the look on Daniel's face. Revenge would feel sharp for a moment, but consequences. Those last, Thursday afternoon, Emily called again. This time she didn't shout. I'll sign, she said, her voice was flat. No contest, no argument. I waited. I was scared, she added. Of what? I asked. Of being alone, she said. Of not having enough, of being second. Second, that old wound. You were never second, I said quietly. You just thought love was a competition. She didn't respond. I'm not pressing criminal charges, I told her, a small inhale on the other end. But we're restoring the trust exactly as it was. 50-50, and the house sale proceeds are split. Yes, she said, and Emily, yes, this ends here. There was a tremor in her reply. It ends. The mediation agreement was signed the following Monday. The house was sold 2 weeks later. Half the proceeds were wired into my account, not stolen, not negotiated under pressure. Mine. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt balanced. Daniel moved out before the end of the month. The marriage lasted 22 days. As for Emily, she left Connecticut by August. A fresh start, according to family group texts. No one mentioned the wedding anymore. No one mentioned the trust, but people treated me differently, not with pity, with respect. Because the truth had been documented, and documentation is louder than gossip. 3 months later, I stood in my small Stamford apartment, surrounded by unpacked boxes and sunlight. It wasn't the house I grew up in, but it was honest. Margaret called that afternoon. You handled it well, she said. I handled it legally, I corrected. She laughed softly. That's usually the hardest way. When I hung up, I thought about something I'd learned. Revenge is emotional, justice is administrative. One burns fast, the other holds. Emily didn't lose everything. She lost control of the narrative. She lost a marriage built on omission. She lost the illusion that I wouldn't defend myself. And I gained something far more valuable than money. I gained proof that patience, when paired with truth, doesn't just expose deception. It outlasts it.